Buffalo Soldiers and Bicycles, the history and the St. Louis connection. That's coming up next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. Today we're going to learn about Buffalo Soldiers and Bicycles. Maybe you've never heard about it before, but we're going to explain that. And I'd like to introduce our guest today. On the far end of the couch, please welcome Ann Milford from the Great Rivers Greenway, and also Angela De Silva from the National Black Tourism Network. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How come that I'm not familiar with, I'm kind of shocked that I've never heard about this before, because doing a little research, this is a story that goes back a long, long way.
It's one of those holes in Black history that, for so many years, Black history was considered important to carry, to teach, and it wasn't taught. And that's pretty much what I do as an adjunct professor and the National Black Tourism Network, is to bring those lesser-known aspects to light. But this was a major story in 1897. The whole country was following the progress of these men as they crossed the 5 states to get here.
Yeah, we'll have to back up and explain all that in a second. You said you're an adjunct professor, and that's at Lindenwood. Mm-hmm. What do you teach there?
Well, cultural tourism. It's the study of many cultures, of becoming more culturally sensitive, and storytelling. Because truly, why do we travel? We want to hear other people's stories.
Right. Ann, tell us about Great Rivers Greenway and what role you play in that.
Okay, Great Rivers Greenway is your park and trail district. We were founded in 2000, and we are building a network of greenways that connect the whole region, St. Louis City, St. Louis County, St. Charles County. And this event we're talking about today actually takes place on the Mississippi Greenway, north of downtown St. Louis, and it's at the Mary Meachum crossing site. And Angela can tell a much better story than I can about what actually happened there, but we've been working together for many years now to have this annual celebration, and she comes up with these amazing historical events that are tied to, every year after the original event that happened there, to remind people of this amazing Black history and events that happened in St.
All right,
Louis.
well, we got a video we're going to show in just a second, but before, it's kind of complicated, so before we get into it, maybe we should just, for those that don't know, explain who Mary Meacham was.
Mary Meacham was the widow of John Berry Meacham, who will create the first Black church west of the Mississippi. And John Berry Meacham had been born a slave and eventually will buy his freedom and come to St. Louis, where he will create a barrel making factory. He was a cooper by trade. He will establish, again, the first Black church. But what is so unique about John Berry Meacham is that in his congregants, when he heard that were going to be sold away, either, families split up, he would then, with other like-minded individuals, buy that person. Then that person would work off their freedom price in his barrel making factory. We also know that in the basement of his church, they had what they call a candle tallow school, which was an illegal school to teach Blacks how to read and write. Once they worked off their purchase price by utilizing the Underground Railroad, they would have their freedom papers, they would know how to read and write, and then they would be shepherded to freedom.
And Ann, what happened to the Mary Meacham crossing? Why is that a destination point for us?
Because back, again, Angela could tell this story better, but this was a site where Mary Meacham led some folks across the river to try to escape to freedom in the state of Illinois. You talk.
Now she's going to correct everything you said.
I know. I saw her finger going like this. I'm like, you know what? It's her story to tell.
May 21st, 1855, 9 slaves belonging to prominent St. Louisans were told by Mary Meacham to meet at the Bissell Ferry Landing. Now, the Bissell Ferry Landing, if I'm a farmer who needed to cross into Illinois, I didn't go downtown to the landing down. And
we all know where the Bissell Mansion is.
Right. So it's up there. That was the farmer's crossing. We don't know how long she operated. We know that they were already hooked into the Underground Railroad because they were shepherding people to freedom legally. But after her husband dies in 1854, she still will continue to get people in the pipeline. On that particular night, 9 slaves were standing there at the Bissell Ferry landing. A small boat had been sent for them, was actually called a skiff at that time, down from Alton to row them across the river to the black community of Venice, Illinois. They were told once they got to the Illinois side to run to the tree line where the plank road to Alton would be. But once the boat was so small, only 5 could get in. Once they were rowed across and started running like they were told, what they didn't know is their plan had been found out. The sheriff of St. Louis, some of the deputies and owners were lying in ambush on the Illinois side, started shooting at them to force them back to trap them to the river. But what the sheriff didn't know is there's still 4 slaves on the Missouri side who was watching all of this. We know that when the events of the night were over, 5 slaves were recaptured, 4 did get away. Now, what's interesting about that, 5 of the slaves that recaptured, one was a woman named Esther and her 2 children. Esther was a maid at the Henry Shaw's downtown mansion with her 2 children. He had told her a couple of days before that he had sold her to a cousin of his down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, who was already on his way to come and get her. She asked what was going to happen to my children. He said, "You're going alone." So, of course, she tried to run that night. But when women run with children, they only had a 30% chance of making it. Now, what's interesting, on the Missouri side, there were still 2 mulatto males who were watching this, 2 mulatto males who had escaped that night from Henry Shaw's Tower Grove estate. They had made it that far, all the way from where Tower Grove is to that point. Now, it's interesting, we know exactly what they were wearing, what they looked like, because several days later he will post a runaway notice. We also know that there was an older black woman who knew the slaves that were caught, didn't know her name, but they knew she was a cook at one of the downtown hotels. And then the 4th slave, nobody really knew anything about, and we would imagine this was an opportunistic run for him. He might have gotten that far. He could have been come anywhere from Mississippi to Arkansas and got to that point, saw those blacks waiting there to cross, and just joined them. But when everybody saw what was going on in Illinois, he just kind of melted into the night with everyone else. So this escape was only partially successful. Mary Meacham, of course, was not there. She was arrested that night for aiding and abetting, which after 1850 is a serious felony. And so, but she was put under house arrest. She was never even put in jail.
You know, when I hear these stories, it blows my mind away, because when I sit here and listen to you talk about it, it sounds like you're talking about the plot of an adventure action movie or something, not what happened in real life right here. Don't you think it's hard maybe for people today to really understand what happened, the danger, the risks, both black and white people, some black and white people took on both sides? I mean, it must have been incredible to live through.
When you stand on the banks of the river at that site, I mean, there's a long way across, and I can't imagine, it struck me when I'm on that part of the Mississippi Greenway, what it would be like to do at nighttime, and what kind of a boat were they in, and how scary that would be, looking over your shoulders. I can't imagine.
Well, of course you feel for the slaves and people risking their lives and being treated that way and being forced to take that kind of action. But also the white people, which there weren't many of them that did it at that time, they also took enormous risks. I'm sure they were scorned by their friends and neighbors. And
you scorned? Oh no, you didn't announce. Okay, let's get very real about that. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 was one of the most heinous pieces of legislation ever passed in this country. And in the actual verbiage of it says that you could have been a card-carrying abolitionist, anti-slavery, equality person, and the law says you are commanded to help apprehend slaves. If a master taps you on the shoulder, you could be downtown shoe shopping, and he taps you on the shoulder and said, "That's my slave over there, I need your help," and you go, "No," and he goes, "You will." The punishment was outlandish. We're talking about time in prison. We're talking about a $10,000 fine, and $10,000 would buy you 500 acres of land in western Missouri.
And these were people that had something to lose too.
Completely. They stopped branding people, but it was the stigma. You did not. Jail time, those fines, this was nothing to laugh at. And, you could actually, I could be a white farm owner, and a slave is found, the dogs track him to my barn. I'm still going to be, I didn't even know he was there. by law, by the fugitive slave law, I can be charged for aiding and abetting. And this was intense. But one of my classes, one year, we looked at the whole process of Mary Meacham and figured out 33 people were involved that night. So when you're talking about white people, it was about 33 people involved, whether helping or part of the slave owners, part of the posse. That night, one escaped. 33 lives were touched by what happened that night.
The story like you just told, are there a million other places in the country that the same things went on? Was it unique to St. Louis in any way?
No. There are cases when people found out, but you couldn't. You risked too much to do this. But I tell you, there are people like Levi Coffin, who is considered the chairman of the board, the Underground Railroad Board, as they called it, who organized the entire state of Ohio, but like-minded individuals. And most of these stops were normally about 25 miles. That's what they figured that an average slave could cover in the darkness of night. So they were about 25 miles apart. But so from St. Louis, based on that night, we know the next stop here was Alton.
Well, when did we start to talk about the story publicly? I imagine for many years it wasn't probably covered in history books. I'm just guessing, and I'm wondering when, the Greenway, Great Rivers Greenway, decided to help recognize these sites and the history involved. Could you kind of fill me in on that?
We certainly don't take credit for shining the spotlight on that site. I mean, it just so happens to be on one of the greenways, but there are many historical sites on greenways across the region, the U.S. Grant site, the Sappington House, up in the St. Ferdinand Church up in North County, that's on the Sunset Greenway. But we're building, promoting, and sustaining the greenways. We work with organizations and folks like Angela to shine a spotlight on these stories that are not told or not familiar, and really work more in partnership.
Angela, am I right? Have we only been talking about this in our lifetime? Our parents didn't grow up learning about this, did they?
I can honestly God say, yes, in my house it did. My mother died when I was 10. My grandmother came to live with us. In fact, they just took this exhibit down. She came to live with us to take care of us. And my grandmother, in listening to her stories, by the time I was 11, I knew my grandmother's grandmother had been a slave. And she was a slave, Isabel Lackland Reed. She was owned by the Lackland family of Lackland Road right here in Overland. And her story was really interesting. She fell in love, Isabel fell in love with a freeborn black man who had been a Civil War soldier here with the 65th at Benton Barracks, where Fairgrounds Park used to be, and they got married afterwards by her father/master. So we knew, my grandmother talked about it, but it is unique in our family. With most black families, there's books written about this. My people don't want me to talk about it. There was a lot of shame that was attached to it. And my grandmother took a totally different approach. She had pride, and she taught us to have pride in it. She said, we survived. There is pride in that. We are here.
Well, there's an event coming up that was delayed because of the rain, where you sort of express that pride. And it's the Buffalo Soldiers and Bicycles event coming up on June the 10th. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and I said that I had a video to share, and we'll do that. But we need to take a break.
Sure. And
we'll come back and pick up on more of this in just a couple of minutes. Stay with us.
Welcome, innovators, dreamers, pioneers of the 21st century. We've been expecting you to come discover your dreams and make your ideas take flight. Just like so many explorers that came before you. Welcome to the hub of opportunity. Welcome to St. Louis. Always exploring.
Marie, you have prediabetes.
Pre-diabetes? I don't have time to eat right or exercise. I'm a busy mom.
Oh, you're a busy mom.
Yeah.
This is great news. Busy moms never get prediabetes.
Wait, what?
Let me just... Yeah, this is all the people at risk for prediabetes, and way over here, busy moms. No?
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. We're talking about the upcoming Buffalo Soldiers and Bicycles event, and joining us now is Ann Milford from Great Rivers Greenway and Angela De Silva from the National Black Tourism Network, and we're here talking about this event. And before we get into it any further, Angela, we have a video that you're featured in. Do you want to set that up for us? Why was this made, and what can you tell us about it before we see it?
I believe, just saw a small corner of it. We had, as a Mary Meachum umbrella, under the Mary Meachum umbrella this year, we had a pre-event event. And this was at the public library. It was on March the 25th. After doing extensive research, Spalding only made 26 prototype bicycles for this ride. They took them all back. Only 2 of them exist. One is in a bike museum in London, and one is in private hands here. And he loaned it to us to be on display at the atrium of the library for a month.
We really haven't explained it, and we will right after the video, that this event involves a group that is bicycling from Montana
Yes.
to St. Louis, and there's a reason for it all. We'll get into that, but let's take a look at this video. It kind of helps set the stage a little bit.
1897, the military was looking for an application for the brand new bicycle that had become the rage, and they asked for volunteers. The 25th Infantry of the Colored Infantry, based in Fort Missoula, Montana, will be the volunteers, and they will leave in June of 1897 from Fort Missoula, with the destination being Jefferson Barracks here in St. Louis. They are a total of 1,987 miles, and they will arrive in 41 days. What these men went through is absolutely incredible.
So I want to try and understand this. Was this a publicity stunt originally?
No. It was an actual military experiment. The bicycles, just a couple of years preceding, we now have front and rear tires that are same size. The chain has been created, invented, and now bicycles are easy to ride. And really, it's one of the first times women really get into a physical sport. And so the military, even though it had been tried in Europe, in France, there was a bicycle corps attached to and to the military, and so and in France and in Germany. But the United States, we're so spread out, they didn't know how it was going to work. So in 1896, as a very short trip, 8 Buffalo Soldiers and their lieutenant will go from Fort Missoula down to the brand new National Park Yellowstone, and it's 800 miles round trip, 4 days, and that includes even staying in the park. And it was a really big deal. The military was happy the way it turned out. Yeah, but what happens if we do a longer trip over a lot different terrain? And these are the pictures that you're seeing. When it was 20 Buffalo Soldiers, their white commander, Lieutenant Moss, a newspaperman, and a surgeon who will leave on this route. And these are the pictures that we're looking at now because of the 19-year-old newspaper reporter that was embedded with them. They will leave in June in crossing just 5 days into the trip, crossing into the Rocky Mountains. They'll run into a freak snowstorm that'll dump about 11 inches of snow on them. 3 days later, crossing the Continental Divide, they'll run into an ice storm where their hands are literally freezing to the handlebars. The physical feat that these men went through was absolutely incredible. Lieutenant Moss had arranged every 100 miles for a food stop, and they because of the weight, the bicycle was 53 pounds, Their knapsacks were 43 pounds. Their rifle was, their carbine rifle, which the military said they had to carry on their backs at all times, was 10 pounds, and the cartridge belt, 50-round cartridge belt, was another 5. You saw them in one of those pictures fording a small river, having to carry the bicycle on top of everything else. That's not going to be the first time. They will, when they get to Nebraska, to the Sand Hills, they couldn't get traction on the tires, and they will carry for over 300 miles those very same bicycles. When they're crossing the Dakotas, there were no roads. So they followed the railroad track coming down into to Nebraska. That's another almost 200 miles. Riding railroad tracks going da 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 da, and sometimes those ties, and they didn't put the gravel between the ties as we do now. And sometimes those ties were as far as 2 feet apart. Wow. And so, again, another couple hundred miles. And when they arrived here, they were no worse for wear. But they also, in July, Lieutenant Mawson wrote in his diary on July the 7th, the temperature was over 110 degrees coming into the Nebraska plains. Some of them got heat stroke, but yet they pressed on. This was an incredible feat, but the whole country, because of the young newspaper man, whenever he got to a large enough town that he could file a story, he did. So the whole country was watching. But I also would like to add this. This is 1897. This is 1 year after Plessy versus Ferguson, and segregation is now the law of the land. And these military men did run into that several times along the way.
What do you mean?
Well, Lieutenant there's one that several times where he mentions that towns wouldn't give them water unless he paid for it. Once they had gone about 30 miles in a driving rain. The only farmstead that they come across, he knocks on the door and asks for shelter in the barn. And the man, when he looked out the door and saw the black soldiers, told him to bed down in the pig pen. And Lieutenant Moss goes, "I don't think so," and put the men in the barn and said, "Sue the government."
You know, when I was hearing about how treacherous it was to make that journey, if they'd only had the bike trails that you guys have put in, wouldn't that make it
Nice,
easier?
smooth, paved way. These guys did not have anything. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think
Why
of
were they
what
called
went
Buffalo
through.
Soldiers?
There is some controversy around that, but the legend says it's because of the curly hair of the black men that the Native Americans called them that.
Was that derogatory?
Yes and no. The buffalo was the sustaining life force of the Native Americans, so no. In a way, it was almost respectful, because the buffalo meant a lot to the Native Americans.
Respectful, but they have to sleep in pig pens and not have water. Why am I not understanding?
Well, that wasn't the Indians who did that, okay?
You know, what's interesting is, too, that when they arrived, they came to St. Louis, and talk a little bit about what met them when they arrived in St. Louis.
When we think now about coming from the state, they'll drop down into Missouri north of St. Joseph, and they will start working their way across the north, and they'll come down through like Bowling Green, Eolia, come through Jeff City. They'll come across, there was no Highway 70, so this is the way they drop. But the night before crossing the Missouri into St. Louis County, they spent the night at a farm, sprucing up their bikes, getting cleaned up, and once they crossed the bridge, coming into St. Louis County, they were met by thousands of people, the St. Louis Military Mounted Police, they just huge crowds. And along the way, they were cheered. We know that they came in through Wellston and then came down Union to what was then the Cottage Hotel in Forest Park, which of course no longer exists. But thousands of people, they were cheered like heroes.
So now we've been creating this event over. That's what we're doing again this year. And we have some pictures, I think, of more recent events. And when did this recreation all start?
16 years ago.
Yeah.
This is where we have always focused on the black military history. And these kids went through a morning of military training, boot camp, and even learn to curry horses, as you see there, something that city kids don't really get a chance to do. So we've given them a whole plethora of experiences that is different to hook them up to their past.
Well, I want to make one strong point that this was, the event was canceled this year because, hey, it's St. Louis, the weather changes.
Postponed.
That's what I meant, postponed. Thank you for pointing that out. So tell us the new date, Angela.
June the 10th.
Uh-huh. And what's going to happen that day?
Well, it's going to kick off with a Black History bike ride, which she can address even further if she wants other. There's 7 stops along the way. We'll start downtown on the landing, and then they'll be met by people at these 7 stops who will point out the history that the Black history, not just St. Louis, but the Black history, something, again, these are aspects that no one knows about what the importance of those corners were.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. And what would you like to tell us from Gateway's point of view? What to expect and what you're doing?
Well, Angela and her team have been hard at work for months planning the reenactment and practicing and training and all of that. They'll be in their period costumes. There's going to be a barn dance, a call and response. You don't need any experience. There's going to be food and drink for purchase. And it'll really give, even if you're a lifelong St. Louisan, many people have not been to this location. It'll give you not only a sense of the history that happened there, but views of the St. Louis, the mighty Mississippi that you've never seen before. It's a wonderful event. There's great energy. Folks can ride their bike pretty much the length of the Greenway that day. There's going to be a little closure. They'll probably have it like an 11-mile ride, but when we're having a planned bike ride, working with TrailNet, as Angela mentioned, you meet at 10 a.m. at the Biddle Street Trailhead.
And do you have to sign up or you just show up?
It's a free ride, and you can go on our website, greatriversgreenway.org, or the marymeacham.org website and learn more about it. But you do pre-register so they know.
I know you're calling this a Mary Meacham event, so that makes me think there are other events tied to Mary Meacham?
Yes, we do. What we're trying to do is, number one, create a constituency for the site. And so, like she said, very few people. When we first started, it actually was the slag heap for the city, and they moved it. But one quick thing, the dramatic piece that she mentioned has 17 actors. It's about an hour long, and it's Black St. Louis in 1897. This is amazing, if I do say so myself.
Just a closing word, and I'll start with you, and I think you just kind of referred to it a little while ago. What the importance, I guess what the feeling is if you participate in this. What makes it worthwhile, do you think, for the average person, or what do you hear?
The feedback is that we just didn't know that we don't know our history. That's what we get from a lot of the older people who are beginning to bring their grandkids because they want them to experience this.
Mm-hmm. And Ann?
Well, it's just, to get outside, learn more about our community, explore your rivers, your creeks, your streams, this beautiful, amazing site, and learn more about an important date in history in St. Louis.
Buffalo, soldiers, and bicycles. So we'll encourage people to check out your websites, and thank you for all that you do to call this sort of stuff to our attention. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Nice meeting both of you so much.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Steve Potter. That's all the time we have on this edition of City Corner. Thanks for watching. See you next time.